Tali is a world-renowned researcher in the field of cognitive neuroscience. I'm really excited about her talk. She's a professor of cognitive neuroscience at University College in London. She's the author of The Influential Mind and The Optimism Bias, both award-winning books focused on matters of the mind. She's been featured in New York Times, Washington Post, and her TED Talk on the optimism bias has over 2 million views. So today, Tali's going to talk about how the science of the mind can be used to inspire healthy behaviors. And that's something at MadPow where we're often focused on behavior change design. That's very near and dear to our hearts. So we're excited to introduce Dr. Tali Sharot.
Hello. So I'm a cognitive neuroscientist, which is a mix of neuroscience and psychology, and I mix in behavioral economics as well. I bring people into my lab and I try to understand the brain mechanisms that give rise to how people act every day, how they interact, how they make decisions. And today I'm going to share with you what we've learned about the type of information and approach that is really effective at changing people's behavior and the type of strategies that people use quite commonly but are not as effective. So often when we try to change people's behavior, we focus on future consequences. So we say, invest in my company now and you will be rich in the future. Or eat well today and you will be healthy tomorrow. Don't smoke because you might die young. And the question is, what works better? Highlighting the dangers, scaring people, or perhaps highlighting the possibility of having a bright future? So I'm going to share a study with you that is a fascinating study. I've always liked it, but it's really timely at the moment because the study answers this question, and it does so by looking at hand washing. So we all know that hand washing is a #1 way to stop the spread of disease. And this is especially important in hospitals and in restaurants, and nowadays it's important everywhere. So in a hospital in New York State, a camera was installed to see how often medical staff washed their hands before and after entering a patient's room. Now, this was before COVID, and the medical staff knew that the camera was installed. It wasn't a nanny camera situation. And yet, only 1 in 10 medical staff washed their hands before and after entering a patient's room. But then an intervention was introduced. An electronic board that told people in real time how well they were doing. So every time they washed their hands, they can see the numbers going up, showing them the current shift rate and the weekly rate. And they got a little message saying, good shift, well done. And what happened? Compliance raised to almost 90% and stayed there. So this is quite a striking effect. In fact, it's so amazing that the research team wanted to make sure that it was real. So they replicated the same experiment in another division in the hospital. And this time the medical staff started at 30%, so about 1 in 3 medical staff washed their hands before and after entering a patient's room. Again, the intervention was introduced, the electronic board above every door, and again the compliance raised to almost 90% and stayed there. And the question is, why does this work so well at changing people's behavior? And the answer has to do with general behaviors, not just hand washing or hospitals. If you think about it, what is a normal approach? The normal approach in this case would be to scare the medical staff of the negative events that can happen in the future. You don't wash your hands, there will be disease, there will be illness in the future. But instead of doing that, they focused on progress. They showed the medical staff that the numbers were going up. And indeed, our research suggests that the brain does a much better job at encoding information about how the future can become better, and less so when you give people information about what can happen that can cause decline. So what this means is that we need to reframe our message to highlight the opportunity of progress rather than decline. So for example, instead of telling someone, if you take route A, you will lose time and money, you want to say, if you take route B, you will gain time and money. Highlight the opportunity for progress, what needs to be done to get to the goal. But let me tell you about our research that led to this conclusion. So we conducted a study in which we wanted to see what kind of information really changes people's beliefs. Information that's better than expected or worse than expected. So we brought people into our lab and we asked them to estimate their risks of experiencing all sorts of negative events. So for example, we asked them, what do you think is the likelihood that you will be a victim of card fraud in 100 different events such as this? We asked them about, their likelihood of being ill, of being in an accident, getting divorced. So they put in their estimates and then we gave them information. So we told them, for example, being a victim of card fraud for someone like you is about 70%. What we're interested in is whether people would take the information that we give them to change their beliefs. And so we asked them again, okay, you got the information. What do you think now? What is the likelihood that you will be a victim of card fraud? And what we found was that people were much more likely to take in the information and change their beliefs when the information was better than what they expected. So for example, if someone said, I think my likelihood of being a victim of card fraud is about 90%, and we said, hey, good news, the average likelihood of someone like you is about 70%. The next time around, they said, okay, well, in that case, it's about 75% or so. So they quickly changed their beliefs and they used the information to do so. However, if someone started off saying, I think my likelihood of being a victim of card fraud is about 30%, and we said, hey, bad news, it's closer to 70%. The next time around, they said, I still think for me, it's about 33%. So it's not that they didn't learn at all, but they learned much less when the information we gave them was worse than what they expected versus better than what they expected. So we wanted to know what exactly is going on inside the human brain that causes us to discount bad news. So we conducted the study again, and this time we recorded people's brain activity. So people come into our lab and they lie down on an MRI machine such as this, and we show them all sorts of questions via a little camera that is mounted on top of the head coil, and they can answer using the button boxes. So we did our experiment again. And what we found is when people received good news, the brain did a really good job at encoding this positive information in a few different regions of the brain, including this region here that's called the left inferior frontal gyrus. And it didn't matter what sort of person you were. You could be a really optimistic person, slightly pessimistic, or even depressed. People's brain did a really good job at taking in the unexpected positive news. However, on the other side of the brain, the right inferior frontal gyrus was encoding negative information, and it wasn't doing as good of a job. And the more optimistic someone was, according to trait questionnaires, the less likely they were to take in the negative, So what this means is that when we show people warning signs, such as this, they only have limited impact. People say, yes, smoking kills, but mostly it kills the other guy. But when they hear that the housing market is going up, they say, oh, my house will definitely rise in price. So again, what this means is that we need to reframe our message. Instead of telling a teenage boy, if you smoke, you get cancer, you might say, if you don't smoke, you're more likely to get on the basketball team. Highlighting the action that will get to the goal, to the progress. Now, this doesn't mean sugarcoating anything. If someone did a bad job, it does not mean just thinking about and talking about those things that they did well. It's more about what has to be done to correct, what has to be done to get better. But it's important not only to focus on the future, but also to focus on the present. When we're trying to change people's behavior, we need to think, what is the immediate benefit, the immediate reward that they can get from changing the behavior? And it's something that we don't often do. As I said in the beginning, we often focus on the future. We say, invest now, gain money in a few years. Eat well now, you'll be healthy later on. But what is the immediate benefit? Immediate rewards are very important. In fact, in the study that I just told you that was conducted in the New York hospital, the medical staff received immediate rewards. Every time they washed their hands, they got feedback, a positive feedback saying, well done, great shift. In fact, there were people in India watching them 24/7 and putting in those positive feedbacks. And that message, that made them more likely to wash their hands. Now, our studies have shown that the promise of a reward, an immediate reward, is more likely to elicit action than the threat of an immediate punishment. And this is because of something known as the approach avoidance principle. So let me tell you what this is. So in life, in order to get the good stuff, whether it is chocolate cake or promotion or love, we often need to do something. We need to act. So for example, I'm thirsty, I need to move my hand, grab my water bottle, and drink. So our brain has evolved in this kind of environment where rewards are related to action. And so when we expect something good, a go signal is activated deep in our brain, in our midbrain, and it goes all the way to our motor cortex, and it makes action more likely. On the other hand, in order to avoid a punishment, whether it is poison or deep waters or untrustworthy people, we often, not always, but often what we need to do is actually not do anything. Stay back. And so our brain has evolved in this kind of environment where the threat of a punishment is related to inaction. And so when we expect something bad, there's a no-go signal that is activated deep in our brain, in our midbrain. And it goes all the way to our motor cortex, and it makes action less likely. It inhibits action. Now, we're quite sophisticated creatures. We can overcome this, but our immediate reaction when we feel that something bad is coming is actually to freeze. And so now you can see why threatening the medical staff of the negative events that can happen in the future was not effective in getting them to act, in getting them to wash their hands. And on the other hand, something simple as an immediate reward in the form of a positive feedback was much more effective. So these immediate rewards, they could be something as simple as positive feedbacks. I mean, people go out of their way for those little likes on Facebook, right? What are those? They're immediate rewards. But it can also be monetary rewards. But we need to think, what is it? What can we promise an individual now for changing their behavior in a way that could also benefit them in the future? Now, the other thing that I told you about is that punishments are related to inaction. So in fact, we need to think about the pairing. We need to think if we want people to act, promise reward. But if you want someone not to act, for example, not to share privileged information, perhaps in that case, the threat of a punishment is more effective. So I've told you so far about the importance of highlighting the progress and also about immediate rewards, but the study of the mind is not quite like physics. We don't have rules like gravity that work in every kind of context and for everyone. Context matter and state matters. And one thing that is quite important is, for example, how stressed people are. So people who are under a state of stress really changes the way that our brain works. And one thing that it does, it changes the way we process information. It makes us much more vigilant on negative news, hyper-vigilant towards the negative news. In one study, we brought people into our lab and we wanted to stress them out. These were undergraduate students. So what we did is we told them, you're about to give a 5-minute talk in front of everyone else on a surprise topic that we will give you. And in fact, we're going to record you and we're going to put it on YouTube. So our students got really stressed. They told us that they were stressed, but we also checked their cortisol level and their skin conductance. When you're stressed, you sweat, and everything indicated that they were under high stress. And then we gave them that experiment that I told you about before, where we asked them about the likelihood of being in a car accident or being a victim of card fraud, and we give them information. And what we found was the moment that they got stressed, they start taking in the negative information that we gave them. And the more stressed they were, the more likely they were to take in negative information. Even if the negative information had no contact, no relationship to the reason that they were stressed. So you can imagine how this relates to stressful public events, like a market collapse or terrorist attacks or a pandemic. Under these kind of situations, people across the globe get quite stressed. Even if the terrorist attack is halfway around the world, people get stressed. And then it changes the way that they process information, changes the way that their brain works, starts getting them to be hyper-vigilant on negative news, which at the time, usually there's a lot of. And that can actually cause people to be overly pessimistic, which can cause suboptimal decisions. So for example, after a market collapse, what we see is that people start selling their stocks when really they should be holding on. After terrorist attacks, people cancel their flights and get into a car when in fact flying is more safe than driving. And so it's important to think about who is a person in front of us. What is their state? How stressed are they? Are we in the midst of a pandemic? That would change the way that we need to communicate information. And in fact, the age of the people that we were talking to is important as well, because stress changes with age in a systematic manner. So it starts quite low in kids and teenagers, and it goes up, 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 reach peak at midlife, and then it starts going down. And happiness, by the way, goes the other way. So happiness starts quite high, and then it starts going down, 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 reaches rock bottom in your midlife. But the good news is it then starts going up again. And people don't really know that. But in fact, as people get older, on average, the happiness grows as well. Okay, but what happens if you're talking to someone like this? And what you're trying to do, in fact, is to reduce stress, enhance well-being, enhance optimism. What can we do? Well, one thing that is really important for people's happiness is not necessarily what they're doing at the moment, but what they believe they will be doing later on. So for example, what you think you're going to do later tonight, next week, in a month. Let me give you an example that will really show you how the anticipation of what's about to happen can impact us more than what we're doing in the moment. So this is a study that was conducted at Harvard, where they asked people who were about to go on vacation every day before vacation how happy they were. Then when they were on vacation, they asked every day during vacation how happy they were. And the week after vacation, every day how happy they were. And you want to guess what the happiest day was? So the happiest day was the day before vacation. They were still in the office, they were still working, but in their mind, they were already on vacation. And in their mind, it was quite wonderful. When they went on vacation, it was quite good, but it wasn't as good as it was in their mind the day before. It was the anticipation that made them happy. And in fact, people are perhaps even subconsciously or perhaps consciously aware of this. They're willing to pay for this anticipation. This is a study that was conducted by George Lowenstein, a behavioral economist. And he asked students in his university to pick a celebrity. So everyone pick a celebrity in your mind. Okay. And then he said, imagine getting a kiss from the celebrity. So I hope you picked well. And then he said, how much will you be willing to pay if you got the kiss immediately, in 3 hours, in 1 day, 3 days, 1 year, 10 years? And what he found was that people were willing to pay the most to get the kiss in 3 days. In other words, they were willing to pay in order to wait. Now, they didn't want to wait 10 years. No one wanted an elderly celebrity, but 3 days was the optimal amount. Why is that? Well, if you get the kiss now, it's over and done with. But if you get the kiss in 3 days, that's 3 days of anticipation, jittery excitement, and people wanted that. Now, I told you before that immediate rewards are really important. So what exactly is going on here? Well, when it comes to things that we can imagine, events like holidays and dates and so on, the immediate reward is the imagination, is the anticipation. That's the immediate reward. And then the event itself is the additional reward. And so people get these immediate rewards by imagining. And in fact, this is why people prefer Friday to Sunday. Again, this is kind of a weird result, right? Friday, you're at work, you're in the office, and Sunday, you're out doing whatever you enjoy. So why do people prefer Friday to Sunday? Well, Friday brings with it the anticipation of the weekend ahead, everything that you had planned, all the fun activities. On Sunday, although you can be out in the park, but in your mind, you're already thinking about the work week. And so it brings with it the dread of what's coming next. Okay, so what does this mean? It means that we want to create anticipation. We want to create anticipatory events that people can look forward to, and it will make them happy at the moment. And this is true for our personal life. Always have something in the calendar that you can anticipate. It also means when creating for our team, for example, anticipatory event, but also in marketing. One of the great marketing campaigns that I really like was from a dating app. And what they were promising their clients, they weren't promising them that they would find the love of their life. They weren't promising marriage and kids. They were simply promising them the jittery anticipation before the date. The time that people decide of what they're going to wear and imagining how the date will eventually transpire. And that is something that they could promise, anticipation, and that's regardless of whether the date ends up being a good one or not. Okay, so I'm going to end up with this, which is we're not necessarily aware of how our brain works, right? We're not aware that anticipation makes us happy, or that once we're stressed, we start processing negative information more, or that we encode unexpected positive information better than negative under normal circumstances. But becoming aware of this means that we can use this, because if we know how our brains around us work, how everyone's brains work, that means they should be better at communicating information to others. So some of the things that we talked about was highlighting progress, what action needs to be done to get better rather than focusing on scaring people in decline. Thinking about immediate rewards. How does this change in behavior benefit me now? Considering mental state. Under stress, people will take in the negative more than the positive. And finally, creating anticipatory events, because anticipation is quite powerful at changing people's mental state to the better at the moment. And if you want to learn more, there's more information about the studies in my 2 books, but also on my website, Effective Brain, you could find some of these studies and other material as well. Thank you.
I never get sick of that. I don't know. Tali, thanks so much. Really, really interesting stuff. I've been intrigued by this optimism bias for a long time, and so I love your perspective on it, because I know you really dug into that topic from a research perspective. We do have some questions here. The first was, I work. Sorry, something's going on my iPad here. I work in insurance, and the optimism bias can be a barrier in terms of helping people identify risk properly. And curious if there are any techniques or thoughts you have about how we can help make some of the risk real.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think when it comes to insurance, the problem is that you're trying usually to convince people that there is a potential harm in the future, right? So you're focusing on the bad stuff and you're focusing on the future. And both of these things are things that we feel uncomfortable about, right? We don't want to think about these bad things, and we're more concentrated in the now than in the future. So one thing that I suggest is try to think about what are the immediate rewards of buying insurance, not only how it will help me in the future, but are there immediate rewards for me to invest money now in insurance? For example, there could be immediate emotional rewards. I buy insurance now, that makes me feel less anxious. It makes me feel more secure. Immediately, my mental state becomes better. Are there material rewards that you can give people that are relevant for buying insurance now? So try to change your focus from the standard way of trying to focus people on the risk in the future, move it to the benefits, frame it in a beneficial way, and move it to the present.
That's great. Yep. Good. Let's see. Here's a question. How does loss aversion play into your research or not?
Mm-hmm. Yes, so loss aversion is interesting. So we've done quite a bit on that as well. So the first thing that's interesting about it, that it's usually portrayed to the public as this idea is that a loss feels worse than a gain feels good. That is, if I lose $1, I will feel worse. I'll lose $100, I will feel worse than how good I will feel if I gain $1. So first of all, that's this idea of feelings turns out not to be true. When you actually measure feelings and have people express their feelings, it turns out that there's no loss aversion in feelings. So we've done a study on that we published. People can find it, where we see that there isn't loss aversion of feelings. However, there is still it's still loss aversion in decisions. which is in fact what Carmen Tversky had originally written about. And it turns out, they interpret it as it must say something about our feelings. Turns out that it's not. But it's still true that when it comes to the loss domain, people tend to be risk averse, right? Risk seeking, sorry. And then the gain domain people are the opposite way around. When it comes to optimism bias, it's not really about the feelings per se. It's about my estimation of how likely things are to happen. So, and it's not even about my decisions of what to do. It's just about this estimations of probability, which actually loss aversion doesn't really talk about. And it's this idea that I think, oh, my likelihood of, divorce, accidents, and so on is lower than people are telling me or that the evidence is showing me. That doesn't necessarily mean that I don't think I will feel really, really bad if I will get divorced, really, really bad if I do get sick or in an accident. But I think that the likelihood of that is lower, right? So it's about how I'm perceiving risks and not so much, in fact, about how I feel if it actually happens, and not so much about how it then plays into the decisions and the weights that I put on these different risk estimates that I have.
Interesting. It's more connected to this forecasting that we're trying to do and that we're flawed at doing at times with certain things.
Yeah, because making a decision involves a lot of different aspects. It involves how likely are the outcomes, how I will feel if the outcomes happen, how do I weight them in my decision process, and all of these things have different biases to them that play into our final decision.
Yeah. I just started this behavior where I'm walking into a room and I forget why I did it. Do you have any insight into what's going on when that happens?
Yes, as you get older, your memory declines.
That's what
this happens to me as well.
Someone told me that. It's slipped my mind. So, well, Tali, thank you very, very much for being here. I really appreciate it. And thank you.